each one of us can do a lot more than we believe that we can. And the best way to find out what you can achieve is simply to get in the game and do it.
Our guest this week on Uprise Talks is the brilliant and absolutely lovely Paul Shapiro, author of Clean Meat and founder of the Better Meat Company, and now also recently father to a new rescue dog called Eddie the Pitbull. While we're talking, I was really blown away not just by Paul's passion for reducing our footprint on the earth through his work, but also his attitude towards business and entrepreneurship in general. If you're looking to start a purpose-driven business, he provides some really useful insight into things like getting over that fear of failure and feeling like you're not qualified enough, learning by taking action rather than reading books. And another thing that I found really interesting was his attitude towards business, innovation, and competition in this landscape of purpose-driven businesses, and his collaborative attitude towards both success and ultimately making the world a better place through business. So, without further ado, let's get started. Welcome to Uprise Talks.
Thanks, Katie. It's great to see you, even though because of the pandemic, we are not physically together, but I'm glad that we can see each other and still talk.
So I haven't told you that I'm going to do this, but I want to start with some quick fire questions to get us warmed up. First question, are you ready?
I'm ready, Katie.
Okay, dogs or cats?
Oh, listen. I have a dog who I love so much, and his name is Eddie. He's named after my grandfather. And my wife and I decided to foster him during the pandemic because our local animal shelter got shut down and they had to get rid of all the dogs. And so we fostered him, and we didn't anticipate becoming actual home for him, but he was such a nice dog, such a cool dog, that we decided to keep him. And as you can imagine, not because of me, but because of my wife, he now has his own Instagram account. So if you want to follow the exploits of Eddie, he is on Instagram at Eddie the Pitty, Pittie, as in Pitbull. So Eddie the Pitty on Instagram. And it's a lot of fun to watch him.
Oh, I'm so jealous. So I'm actually, as we speak, I'm waiting for a verdict from my landlord about whether he's going to let us have a dog or not. Because we've been for a very long time. So fingers crossed.
Eddie has brought us a lot of happiness, and I hope that a dog will bring you some happiness too.
Okay, next question: beach or mountains?
Definitely beach. No explanation needed.
Nice. Box set or film?
Film.
Okay. Apple or Android?
The reality is that I use an iPhone and an iPad. However, much of my life is based on Google. I use a Chromebook. All my email is through Google. So I'm really covering this world. And I would say personality-wise, I kind of perceive myself as having higher fidelity to Google. But because my first smartphone ever was an iPhone, I've just had an iPhone ever since smartphones came out. So I know that language, and when I look at Androids, it's like I don't know what to do. It's just like a different language. So I would say in my heart, it's Google, but in my pocket, it is Apple.
It's funny how you can associate a brand more with your personality than one or the other. Interesting. Not sponsored, by the way. Okay, sweet or salty?
I would go with sweet over salty, but the type of sweetness I like is normally not like a sugary sweetened things, whereas I generally tend to prefer things that are not fruit juice sweetened, but fruit, like mangoes.
Okay.
Or
natural
like
sugary.
That. Yeah, like a whole food sugar as opposed to anything that is isolated. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. And finally, book or podcast?
Oh, I love both of them, Katie. That is the toughest one of these at all, because I consume. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, thank you. But yeah, I consume both in pretty high frequency. So I probably listen to more podcasts than I do reading books, just because I listen to podcasts while I'm doing things, like while I'm running or while I am, making my dog Eddie's breakfast. Like that is a thing that I can do all the time. Whereas reading is something I have to like devote where I can't do anything else during it. And so I probably listen to podcasts more, honestly.
Okay, well, on that note, your podcast, it is all about businesses which are doing good in the world and are very sort of purpose driven at the same time as obviously being profitable businesses. What do you really define as a purpose driven business for good?
Sure. I'm so glad you asked this, Katie. So, look, there are some companies that have awesome sustainability initiatives, right? Where they're trying to reduce their footprint, or maybe they're giving to charity, or they have some program as part of their company that's doing good in the world. But that's really not so much what the Business for Good podcast is about. What Business for Good podcast is about is companies who, by the very nature of their business, are doing good in the world. That is to say that the more that they sell, the better off the world is, because what they're selling has some solution to some social problem. So I'll give you an example. Recently, we had on the show a woman who started her own nuclear waste storage company called Deep Isolation. And what she's trying to do is create a way that you can permanently store nuclear waste safely for hundreds of thousands of years. And this is a big problem. We have huge amounts of nuclear waste that's just sitting in temporary facilities across the world at hundreds of nuclear reactors. And it's just sitting there. And no matter what you think about nuclear energy, the problem is this waste exists today, and it's going to be dangerous for many, many millennia. We have to do something for it, because in all certainty, it's going to outlast our civilization, let alone our government. And so that's one example. Another would be companies that are, for example, growing meat without having to raise animals, because raising animals for food is a very resource intensive practice, lots of land, lots of water, lots of greenhouse gas emissions. Whereas if you could grow meat from animal cells without having to raise and slaughter the animals, you could reduce the footprint of the meat industry dramatically. Then you also have companies that are producing plant-based meat, where they're making plant-based proteins that look and taste like animal proteins as well, which is a different category. Or companies that, for example, one woman we had on the show recently from a company called Outlander Materials. She's taking the brewery waste and she ends up fermenting it, like subjecting it to a fermentation step that transforms it into an alternative to plastic. So it's a natural biodegradable alternative to plastic. So, the point is that by the very nature of what these companies are doing, they're set up to make money by solving a problem. And one of the people on the show recently, a guy named David Katz from a company called Plastic Bank, had a really good way that he put this. He said, nonprofit organizations look at money and they think, how can I solve a social problem while depleting this resource as slowly as possible, right? How can we extend this money as long as possible to solve the problem? Whereas entrepreneurs look at money and they say, how can I multiply this money as quickly as possible and solve this problem? And it's a different mindset. It's a paradigm shift in how you think about it. And it's not to knock nonprofits at all. I'm very supportive of them. But it is to say that it's just a different way of looking at it. And when you apply commerce and innovation to solving social problems, you can go really quickly because of that difference.
Definitely. And I think that's really interesting as well, thinking about it as by nature, the companies, the better the company does, the better the world becomes, or the more of that problem you're solving. Because I think that it's obviously a big kind of trend at the moment, like everyone wants to be more environmentally friendly, everyone wants to be doing better for the planet. I think there are a lot of companies out there who are maybe trying to put a sticking plaster on top of what they're already doing. Whereas obviously the companies that you're speaking to, it's almost like from day one, from their very core, they've built the company out of that, solving that problem, rather than trying to kind of have add it as a little kind of add-on afterwards.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Katie. So most of the people who I interact with who are doing this started their companies not because they wanted to get rich. They started their companies because they had a career in either, they were either working in public policy or they were in the nonprofit sector. They were trying to solve some problem. And then they thought, maybe there's a business in trying to solve this. And so, yeah, of course, look, these companies have to make money. In fact, John Mackey, the CEO of Whole Foods, who was a guest on the show, had a really good analogy on his episode. He said, your body makes red blood cells. If it doesn't make red blood cells, you die. But that doesn't mean that the purpose of your body is to make red blood cells. It just means that you have to do it, otherwise you'll die. But the purpose of your body is whatever you deem it. So whatever you, Katie, decide is the purpose of your life, that's the purpose of your body. And the same is true with the business. Your business must make money. If it doesn't make money, it dies. But that doesn't mean that the purpose is to make money. The purpose is whatever you want. So Google's purpose is to organize all the world's information and make it readily available for free to as many people as possible. Amazon's goal, as they say, is to be the most customer-friendly company on the planet. The goal of a company like Impossible Foods, which is a plant-based meat maker, as their CEO, Pat Brown, puts it, is, his goal is to end the raising and slaughtering of animals for food. And so, you look at this and there are goals that the founders of these companies have that far go beyond just the ability to make a profit. Yeah, of course you have to make a profit. Nobody's denying that. But you have a higher purpose. And the companies that have higher purpose, I think, are the ones that are going to do better, because when you have those type of mission-driven founders, they're willing to make even more sacrifices to make it work, I think.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you said about having that purpose first and then figuring out how to make money from it, because your background before you became an entrepreneur and set up the Better Meat Company was you were in animal rights lobbying and you were educating people about this subject for a long time before you turned it into a business, which is kind of, I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't necessarily do that. They think of a business idea, but it's not necessarily something that they've been looking at for a long time. So do you think that's changed your experience as an entrepreneur and how you've managed to found your business?
Yeah, for sure. And so, I spent 2 decades working in the nonprofit sector, trying to advance animal welfare, especially the welfare of animals who are raised for food. And so I lobbied a lot to try to pass laws to give better protections to farm animals. However, if you look, for example, let's just say at animal welfare as one key demonstration, the animal welfare movement in the United States was largely founded by people in the 1860s and 70s who wanted to protect carriage horses. That was the big problem in the city streets. These carriage horses were being savaged, treated horribly. And so they campaigned. They campaigned to get better working conditions, watering stations for the horses, resting hours for the horses, Sabbath days on which the horses couldn't be worked at all. And then Henry Ford comes along and does more for horses than those animal advocates had ever dreamt of doing. And Henry Ford wasn't doing it to protect horses. He was doing it because he wanted to make money. And he was asked, and he famously responded, if I had asked customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. But instead, he created something that was much better than a horse. And that rendered the exploitation of horses pretty much obsolete, something that humanity had relied on for literally thousands and thousands of years. Our civilizations were really built on the backs of horses, almost literally. And then a new technology comes along, and within decades, it renders horse exploitation virtually obsolete. Similarly, we used to hunt whales extensively. We slaughtered them, turning the blue oceans red with their blood. There were lots of concerns in the 19th century about the treatment of whales. But what ended up freeing the whales wasn't sustainability concerns. It wasn't humane sentiment. It was the invention of kerosene, which was a better way to light our homes than whale oil was. It was cheaper and burned cleaner. And that decimated the whaling industry within decades. And so my thinking on this, as somebody who spent 2 decades working to improve the treatment of farm animals, is not that we shouldn't be doing that. In fact, I think we should be doing more of that. But it is that there is a greater efficiency that you could have in creating products that simply render the existing products archaic and obsolete. And so that is why I made that shift in my own career to co-found my own company, The Better Meat Co., to focus on making alternatives to the standard animal proteins that are currently being consumed worldwide.
Mm. Yeah, I suppose it's, I love that bit in your TED Talk, by the way, I watched it, was when you had you brought out the whaling spear and then the slaughterhouse knife as well. Both
cool.
Both of
Katie,
those.
Katie, I'm honored that you watched till the end of the TED Talk, first of all, so that's very nice of you.
Of course.
But yes, the harpoon that I used there is actually on the wall in our lobby at the Better Meat Co.
Is it? Oh, amazing.
Yeah, along with a quote on the wall underneath it by Buckminster Fuller, the famous inventor, who said, "To change something, build a new model that renders the old model obsolete."
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to do at the Better Meat Co, is to build new ingredients that you can use that will help to build a new type of protein industry that doesn't rely on the raising and slaughtering of billions and billions and billions of animals who are subjected to conditions that most people would rather not think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's such a great example of, I think when most people think about how to solve a problem like meat consumption, people would think about, okay, well, how can we treat animals more fairly? How can we make that process better for them? Or B, how can we encourage humans to eat less meat? And actually, it takes that real entrepreneurial thinking of, forget those, let's try something completely different that actually means we don't have to do those things at all. It's like that true essence of thinking of the problem first and then thinking of the best way to solve that problem, rather than having an idea and then seeing if that solves the problem.
Yeah, so first of all, I agree with what you're saying. And I'll supplement it by saying that I think a lot of people are very effective at identifying problems. A lot of people are able to say, hey, plastic pollution, that's a real problem. We should do something about it. Meat consumption is too high. We need to reduce it. There's lots of easy ways that you can point your finger and say that's a problem. It's harder to think of an innovation that will solve the problem. And so as humans, it's easy for us to complain. It's harder for us to invent. And I think, though, that there's an increasing number of people who really do want to invent better food systems, better transportation systems, better packaging systems that are going to leave a lighter footprint on the planet, that are going to be better by humanity as well. And I'm very proud to be able to have a platform via the Business for Good podcast to be able to profile many of those entrepreneurs who are trying to do just that.
So going back a little bit, your career has been built around lobbying for better animal rights, now the Clean Meat Co, your book, everything's around the same sort of theme. And obviously that's a purpose that you found in your own life. What was it that drew you to that? And how do you feel is the best way to go about finding your own purpose?
Well, what drew me to this was a couple of things, Katie. So first, I grew up as an animal lover. I loved watching wildlife. I loved my family's dogs. And so I've always wanted to protect animals. And it's always really bothered me when I see animals being taken advantage of or being treated in some abusive manner. At the same time, I've also recognized that the overconsumption of meat is at the heart of many of the most pressing problems that our planet and that our species faces. It's a leading cause of animal cruelty. It's a leading cause of climate change. It's a leading cause of deforestation, of antibiotic resistance, of land and water use, of oil use, of greenhouse gas emissions, and more. And so it's very rare that you have one thing that is at the heart of so many of the problems that we face. And yet, the simple solution, which would be to eat less meat, is not a popular solution right now. Meat consumption is going up, not down. Per person meat consumption around the world is increasing. It's increasing in Europe, it's increasing in the United States, but more importantly, it's increasing in places like China and India and Brazil and Mexico, and all the places that are going to matter most in the future are increasing very rapidly their per person meat consumption and their per person of existence in their country as well. And what that means is that, barring some new innovation, like, we're going to have to do something, right? Like, the planet isn't getting any bigger. Humanity's footprint on the planet is getting bigger, but the planet is not getting any bigger. We're not going to start farming the moon or Mars anytime soon. And so you can't add another couple billion people onto the planet in the next 30 years and have a higher per person consumption of meat without destroying the rest of the Amazon or destroying the rest of the forests elsewhere throughout our planet, because we don't have enough space to grow all these crops and have all these animals out there. So you're gonna have to get a lot more efficient. And there are several ways to do that. You could, for example, grow meat from animal cells rather than having to raise and slaughter entire animals. You could grow meat products from plants so that you take plants and then make them in such a way that they look and taste like meat. You could blend animal and plant proteins together so that if you eat a burger, maybe it'll be 50% plant-based, 50% animal-based. There's lots of ways that you can really get the bite out of this apple, so to speak. But one option that is not a possibility is the status quo. And so both my love for animals and wanting to protect them and my recognition that the current way that we feed ourselves is completely unsustainable and is setting us up on a crash course with civilizational collapse if we don't become a lot more innovative, then those things drive me to want to continue doing this work.
Yeah, it's obviously a massive problem to solve. You've mentioned quite a few competitors and, different ways that other people are solving this problem as well. Do you ever find there's sometimes conflicts when you're running a really purpose-driven company between wanting as many people to be solving this as possible, but obviously there's an element of competition there. So the better your competitors are doing, it's great because the more of this problem is solving, but equally there's a conflict of interest there.
Yeah, Katie, I do think that there is a sense of that in some parts of the industry, but in most parts, I get the sense that people feel that they are collaborators, not competitors. And a lot of that is because many of the people running these companies come out of the same movements. They're coming out of the environmental and animal welfare and public health communities, and so they have a sense that, hey, look, we're all on the same team. That's certainly my feeling. If I hear about another plant protein company that's doing well, I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled not only for the world, but I'm also thrilled because it probably means that the investment climate is going to be better for the rest of us. Beyond Meat having such dramatic success upon its IPO was a rising tide for all of the companies in the plant protein space because it brought more investment into the community as a whole, because everybody wants to bet on that next Beyond Meat. Additionally, I would also just say, plant-based meat is still a tiny, tiny little fraction of the total meat industry. Less than 1% of meat that is sold is plant-based. 99+% is animal-based.
Yeah.
And so, it's different in the dairy industry where 13% of the fluid milk sales in America are now plant-based, but still 87% of fluid milk sales are cow-based. However, in meat, it's such a tiny little thing that I think most of the companies in the space recognize that the pie can expand dramatically bigger for all of us, that it's not like we're all going after this one slice. We can create a society where demand for these products is dramatically higher, and that will build a bigger pie for all of us.
Yeah, 100%. But I suppose when you're solving a problem that's that big, there's enough of it to go around. And hopefully the more successful more companies like yours are, it becomes a sort of positive cycle.
I agree. It's a virtuous cycle. And I mean, there is so much of this problem out there that the opportunities are virtually endless. I mean, my guess is that, the next billion-dollar company in this space may not have even been founded yet. And so, we're in the very early days of the alternative protein revolution, and there's a long way to go. But I think there's going to be a lot of winners that are going to come about, and some of them may not even exist yet. Yeah,
maybe someone listening will start it. You never know.
I would love that. I do hear from people, not that infrequently, that they have started a company either because they read my book, Clean Meat, or because they listened to the Business for Good podcast, and it's always very gratifying. And I always think, geez, I wish I could throw them some money and invest in them. That would be really great. But, it's a wonderful... It's a really wonderful feeling to think that there may be people starting their own companies as a result of some of this. And if I can be even a small player in that, I would be very gratified.
So what sort of advice would you give to someone that's maybe thinking about starting a really purpose-driven, mission-driven company? Where do you start?
There's one very simple, one-syllable word that I always recommend. And it's the most important thing that they can do. And that is simply start. People are held back because they have these psychological limitations and they think, oh, I could never do this. Those people are doing it, but I couldn't do it. The reality is that many people less qualified than you, and yes, the person listening, I'm talking about you, there's many people less qualified than you to be doing what they're doing. And you may think, oh, what do I know? I don't have an MBA. Who cares? Look at Josh Tetrick, the CEO of Just. This is a company, it's a unicorn. They're worth over $1 billion. They make lots of great plant-based products. And what business did he have starting his own company? He had no food industry experience, essentially no business experience. And yet he started a company that now is worth over $1 billion and is doing really great things making plant-based alternatives to eggs. It's amazing. And when I interviewed him for the Business for Good podcast, I asked him, what was his experience prior to starting it, and he said that I had no experience whatsoever. And, there's just I think a fallacy in people's minds that they need some type of experience. Look, if you have an MBA from Harvard, that's awesome. You're even better suited to go out and raise some money probably. But I would encourage people simply to start. And yeah, there's awesome resources. So, you can email me, go to my website, which is paul-shapiro.com. Again, that's paul-shapiro.com. And you can email me. I'll send you all types of resources about how to start a company, where to look for venture capital, if that's the type of business that you want to do. But the main thing is simply to start, and don't let yourself second guess yourself. Go out and do it and make that difference, because if you don't, maybe nobody else will, and the problem will remain unsolved.
Yeah. There's such a massive difference between thinking about things and actually going and doing them. And I think that's what holds people back so much, is that fear of failure or procrastination or not believing in yourself.
Yeah, and maybe you'll fail, who knows? But you'll certainly fail if you don't try. That's one great way to fail.
Yeah. How did you kind of get over that fear? I mean, arguably you're pretty qualified to start your business, given, your whole sort of career, but there's obviously still going to be scary moments as an entrepreneur and still risks that you have to take. So how do you kind of deal with that fear of stepping into the unknown?
Well, it was certainly an unknown for me, but I wasn't that fearful because I believed that we had a really good idea. What we're doing is basically creating plant protein ingredients for blending into meat. And nobody else is doing that in the United States. And I felt confident that we would have a big market, that meat companies would want to work with us so they could use fewer animals and have better products. And so far, that has been true. We've partnered with meat companies and it's working quite well. So I always believed in the idea. And I never feared that, we would, suffer from lack of demand or anything like that. But I will say, I don't know that I was that qualified to do it, honestly, Katie. I mean, I had experience in nonprofit management, but I didn't have any experience running a business. And in fact, my co-founder, Joanna Bromley, who incidentally does have an MBA from Harvard, I remember, and this is embarrassing, I've never publicly admitted this, but I'll say it here. In the very early days, before we had even named the company, she was talking about COGS. And anybody involved in a rudimentary way in business knows that COGS means cost of goods sold. I had no idea what it meant. She said this to me, and I looked at her, and she looked back at me, and I remember she must be thinking I'm a complete idiot. But I didn't even know what that was. I mean, so I don't think I really was that qualified to start a company. But I did it. And I think there's lots of people, go read Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, the CEO or the founder and longtime CEO of Nike. It's an amazing story of the founding of that company. And now we think of it as this global corporate behemoth. But when it started, and for years, he had nothing. I mean, it was just losses after losses and problem after problem. And this guy was completely ill-equipped to start a business. So I just think that don't wait for somebody else to try to solve this problem, because they may not do it, or maybe you'll do it better. And each one of us can do a lot more than we believe that we can. And the best way to find out what you can achieve is simply to get in the game and do it. I mean, imagine if somebody said to you, hey, I really want to learn how to play soccer, or for those of you who don't live in America, football, right? So, imagine if somebody said, hey, I really want to learn. Would you tell them, oh, great, well, go read these books and take these classes and learn the rules of the game? Or would you tell them, get out on the field and start practicing? You learn by doing it, not just by reading about it, but you learn by doing it. And that's what I would recommend. If you want to see if you can make it happen, get on the field and start playing.
And even if you fail, it'll be a big learning curve.
Yeah, well, hopefully you won't fail. And if you do, get back up. Lots of teams lose. Lots of people lose. They get back up and they go at it again. You're going to die soon. All of us are going to die very soon. So stop wasting the time. I figure my life is maybe about half over right now. And I can assure you, to me, that is a great catalyst for me to want to quickly move to try to solve the problem and achieve what I want to achieve in my life, which is to make the world a better place by reducing humanity's footprint on the planet. I mean, for me, I want the Earth to look different from space because of what we are doing, that there will be more forests, less land that had to be cleared to grow crops for farm animals or to let farm animals graze, and have more forests, more room for wild animals, and less room taken up for the animals who are owned by humanity. And that is a lofty vision, and one that I know we have to really work hard to do. And so I am really eager to not waste any time.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever come up against people who would hear you saying that and hear a vision that's that big and be like, there's no way that you're going to be able to, you know, change the world that much with a business that's profitable and so purpose driven as well?
Sure, all the time, of course. And, you know, let me say first, I don't expect to do this alone. I think there's lots of companies and lots of organizations who are going to help to achieve that goal. So I don't think all of it is on our shoulders of the Better Meat Co. by any means. But I do want to have our oar in the water, and I do want to row in that same direction and create that type of a world. And I mean, you know, look, I'm sure that the idea that, you know, somebody would tell Henry Ford that you're never going to change the world was probably said to him numerous times. I'm sure they said it to Steve Jobs and Phil Knight and all these other people. And of course, it's not to say that you're going to be the next Steve Jobs or you're going to be the next Phil Knight or whatever, but it is to say that you're never going to be anything in that league if you don't try. And I am not going to fail for lack of trying. For me, I will never give up this fight to try to reduce humanity's footprint on the planet by reducing the number of animals who we're raising for food. It's imperative both for the sake of animal welfare, for the sake of the planet, for the sake of public health. This is really the fight of our era. It's easy to think about so many other issues, and there's many important issues. I'm so glad that people are working on them. But at the heart of so many of the problems we face, it's, you know, raising and slaughtering billions and billions of animals in conditions, again, that are really hard to even think about a lot of the times. And so I feel more confident than ever that this is a great field to be in, and I hope other people will be in it and be even more effective than we are, so we can get to that stage where we've really made the tangible dent in our footprint on the planet, and then I'll die pretty happy.
It's definitely a really exciting space to be in at the moment. There's obviously been a huge increase in awareness over recent years in terms of the environment, in terms of the meat we're eating. Why do you think this is happening now, and where do you see it going in the near future? Because as you in your TED talk as well, you kind of talked about how hundreds of years ago we had the women's rights movement, and these things come in waves. Why do you think it's now that we're talking about this?
Well, Katie, first, so you've referenced 2 of my talks now, so you really went out and watched these. I really appreciate it. But yeah, I mean, it's very, very kind of you. I'm going to brag to my wife that somebody has watched 2 of these talks when I see her this evening. So anyway, you know, look, there is a natural progression that is occurring in human civilization. It's not self-executing. It doesn't mean it just happens inevitably. But we've gone from a society in which we pretty much only cared about like our family or clan or tribe, to then thinking, well, maybe we should care about people of other races or people of other nations or people of other religions. And these are all pretty new. You know, the idea 100 years ago that you should care as much about people of another religion than your own religion would have been not a mainstream view at all. And so if you look back, let's just say 150 years ago, like the legitimate social debate was whether one person should be able to own another person or not. 100 years ago in America, we were debating whether half of us, women, ought to be able to vote or not. 50 years ago, it was a matter of social controversy as to whether Black Americans should be able to drink out of the same water fountains as white Americans. And you look at all these positions, and we all know what like the right side of history was on them. But at the time, it was totally socially normal to hold the wrong view on these. At the time, it was, you would not be ostracized. You know, today, if you were to say, oh, I don't think women should be able to vote, or I don't think blacks and whites should be able to share water fountains, or I think some humans ought to be held in bondage, like you would be ostracized from your community for espousing a view that a blink of an eye ago, historically speaking, was totally normal to hold. And you look at then today and you think, well, what may be normal views for us to hold today that our descendants are going to think of as really morally bankrupt? And I would posit that among those is going to be our view that other animals are just commodities for us to exploit and do whatever we want with them, as if they're just, inanimate pieces of property. And I don't think it's that unlikely that our descendants are going to have not too kind of a view of what we did to animals in our era. And I imagine that they're going to be thinking to themselves, I am so glad that we no longer do to animals what our ancestors did, because they're going to see it as something that's really ethically questionable. And, it's so easy for us to look back and say, oh, how could anybody have supported denying people the right to vote or integration or the end of slavery and so on? And it's not to suggest these are all morally equivalent. It's not to say these are the same thing, but it's only to suggest that there are views that are normal and acceptable, socially speaking, to hold at that time, that today we consider completely socially acceptable, to the point where if you publicly espouse them, you would be ostracized and lose your friends. And so I think that how we treat animals is one of those issues, and we should think seriously about how we want to be remembered.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. This is a conversation that I've actually genuinely had with a number of my friends and housemates. I'm thinking about I've seen friends starting to go vegan because of animals or the environment or whatever it is that their reasons are, and saying exactly what you're saying, and that I think our children or our grandchildren will probably one day turn around and look at us with disgust at us eating farmed meat, in the same way that probably when we're sat around the dinner table with my 99-year-old grandma and she says something that's a little bit racist, and because she doesn't know any better, it's the same strange intergenerational differences of opinion. And I think that could be the next one.
Yeah, it's very self-reflective of you to say that, Katie. It's tough to predict.
So we've actually got a question from one of our listeners to ask you as well. They'd be interested to ask whether you've ever worried about, as a mission-driven business, becoming more of a product or solution-driven business rather than being driven by the problem. That is, when you're invested psychologically and financially in a particular idea, whether there's a risk of losing sight of better solutions to that original problem. So, once you've obviously pursued an idea, how can you emotionally detach yourself from the idea that you think is the most brilliant idea in the world?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's self-serving of me to say this, but I don't think that there is a risk that I'm ever going to lose sight of what the mission of our company is. And it's a very simple, our mission is to reduce the number of animals who have to be raised for food, for a whole variety of reasons that it would be beneficial to do that. So there's lots of ways that we could go out and change what we're doing. As an example, we can use some of the ingredients in some of our formulas for non-meat purposes. We can, do things like use some of them for making higher protein bread or higher protein bars and things like that. But it's not really the mission of the company. And so we're not doing it. And I do think that the questioner is right to ask about it, because you could have that type of a creeping change. As you especially become more and more invested, and you really want to feel like you're going to do anything to make the business succeed. And all I can say is that in my case, I don't fear that, because it is such an overwhelming driving cause of my life to solve this problem.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you really truly sort of know your purpose and your mission, then it just doesn't become an issue, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I can't speak for others, so that is how I feel.
Yeah. And so, obviously you spend time speaking to a lot of different, very purpose-driven founders, building their mission-driven businesses. What are the kind of, are there any sort of common challenges or trends that you sort of see with speaking to sort of purpose-driven founders versus maybe non-purpose-driven founders?
I don't really talk with that many non-purpose driven founders, so it would be hard for me to say, but I'll say that when I talk to a lot of founders, there's never any lack of passion for solving a particular problem, but there is often a lack of informational awareness about how to actually start a company, how to raise money, what the right terms are for your particular type of investment, whether you want to take outside investment at all. Right now, at least, people seem to be pretty keen on venture capital, but you don't have to do that. I mean, in fact, I mentioned my wife a moment ago. She started her own company and has grown it by bootstrapping it, by never taking any outside investment. And she has 6 people who work there now, and it's a profitable company. They're doing a lot of good. So there's lots of ways to do it. And so I think that's the bigger issue, is figuring out like how you actually can run a business and what the variety of options are available to you.
Yeah. And I mean, how did you kind of take those first steps with the Better Meat Co? Like, how did you was it going and talking to people about your idea to figure out if, they thought it was a good idea as well, or whether you were just being crazy, or like, what did those first sort of steps look like?
Yeah, I did talk to a lot of people who I really respected their opinion to get their thoughts on what we could or should do. It wasn't so much about the idea of blending, which I was always a confident believer in. It was more about whether this was the right time, what was the right place, was the right way to do it. And so I talked with a number of people who had already founded their own companies, and a number of other people who I thought might be interested in investing if I did start a company, and want to make sure that we would have the funding available to us. And I also utilized resources from the Good Food Institute, which is a nonprofit organization that helps to advance the field of alternative protein. So between those resources from the Good Food Institute and talking to my own social circle, I would say that was the most helpful. I did read some books as well on business, but they were useful, but not nearly as useful as talking to people who were actually in the space.
And yeah, so in terms of kind of funding as well, you mentioned you were speaking to investors who were in the space who, hopefully might consider investing once you sort of started the company. Was that how did you kind of fund the business in the very, very early stages? And then did that kind of become fruitful in the end of, actually engaging with investors before you even started the company?
Yeah, for sure. I didn't want to, take the first step without knowing that we'd have at least some funding. But we were very fortunate because our first round, our pre-seed round, we knew we were going to have to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars for that pre-seed round, but we ended up raising 1.6 million. And it was more than we anticipated, but we were quite pleased. Startups fail for running out of money. That's the number one reason they fail, is they run out of money. So, you always want to take money when it's available, in my view. And even if that means diluting yourself more or whatever, like, it's just, no startup fails because their founders got too diluted. They fail because they ran out of money. And so we were quite pleased by that. And it was on particularly company-friendly terms, so that was very good. And then we've since gone on to raise a lot more than that, which has also been helpful from some of the same people, but largely that was like a bridge to help us get to raising from the actual venture capital class.
And you obviously kind of said your wife's company has just been bootstrapped the whole way. Like, how do you as a founder decide sort of which route you want to go down and kind of when to take investment, where from, all of that kind of stuff? Because it's quite a difficult world to navigate, and there's a lot of different options and different people out there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I knew for us that we were going to need outside capital. Is what we're trying to do is create actual physical products that require a lot of investment. So I knew we were going to need millions of dollars eventually. In my wife's case, she runs a company called Plant-Based on a Budget, which basically is a brand that is largely selling digital information. So whether that's ads or sponsorships or digital meal plans and so on. So there's not a lot of physical things that are being sold there. But I knew we were going to need that. And so then the question becomes, from who? And I've always been adamant that I want to the extent that we can, align our company with people who are aligned with our ideological mission. So having investors who believe in the mission of the company, not just those who think it's going to be a good business investment, of course, they have to believe that too, but it's making sure that people who are invested with us, who are going to benefit from our success and maybe then go reinvest or donate that money, are going to be people who share our mission. And so that doesn't mean 100% have to do that, but it is our preference to pick people who are going to have that. And then also we want to have people who can actually help the company beyond the capital they invest. There's a lot of folks who will invest money and then they walk away, but there's also a good amount of people who will invest money and be able to really add value to the company, whether by connections, customer acquisition, business advice, and so on. I'll give you an example. We have one investor. His name is Paul Schwartz. And he was an early believer in our company. When we had nothing, I mean, this guy is such a saint. He put in $50,000 at the beginning, and we ran the company out of his living room at that time. And he has enormous business experience. He's a retiree, and he has enormous business experience and has basically been like our pro bono CFO and has really helped us tremendously making decisions that, quite frankly, I don't know anything about. I mean, not that I don't know about the decisions, but on topics that I am very unfamiliar with, like all different types of things. And so somebody like Paul is, it's a $50,000 investment, which is not, in the venture capital world, it's not a big amount of money, but the value that Paul provides is vastly greater than that initial investment because of what he does for our company. And so, I have enormous gratitude to him and others who believed in our company when we had nothing, but who have also really given a lot of their time to trying to make the company successful.
Yeah, and I think as a founder as well, I mean, you were saying earlier how, no one's ever really qualified to start a business because you can't know everything about every different sort of area of the business. But, I did kind of having people around you to support you that maybe, had strengths that were in sort of, that were complementary to maybe what your strengths were. Do you think that sort of helped?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I didn't want to co-found the company with people who were like me. I wanted to co-found the people with people who had different skill sets than I do. You're going to be dividing up the shares. You're going to be dividing up responsibilities. You don't really want people who are similar because you want to maximize the good that you can do for the company. So, if you look at the people running our company today, I would say the three of us have very different skill sets. And they're complementary to one another.
Nice. So I want to finish up by just asking a couple more questions. Firstly, what's next for you or for the company? Are you doing TED Talk number 5 or second book maybe? Or what have you got in the pipeline?
Katie, I actually have written another book, and I haven't published it yet. I would like to find a good publisher for it. It's a novel, though. It is not a.
Wow.
It's a novel that actually, ironically enough, takes place in a post-pandemic world. So I wrote it long before this pandemic, but it's a novel that explores humanity's relationship with other animals, and it's a bit like dystopian sci-fi, but I'd like to find a publisher for it. So if there's anybody out there listening and you're interested in that, I would love to talk with you about it.
Wow, that's awesome. And on that topic, how do you see the world of kind of clean meat looking after, the pandemic that we're always seeing at the moment?
Well, I think a lot of people are recognizing that the way we raise animals for food is a major pandemic risk and major pandemic amplifier. And so I think there's going to be a move to try to change what we're doing and to build a better meat industry, an industry that's less reliant on animals. So that could be plant-based, hybrids, growing meat from animal cells, and so on. And I wrote a piece in Scientific American about this for Scientific American about all the evidence that things like bird flu and swine flu, these could become even way more deadly pandemics than the coronavirus pandemic is for us now. The coronavirus seems to at least have a mortality rate of under 1%, and maybe when all is said and done, it might be far under 1%, perhaps, we don't know. However, when we had the last bird flu that jumped into humans, H5N1, that was a 60% mortality rate, 6-0. The swine flu outbreak from about a decade or so ago killed 250,000 people. So I really think that there's going to be a move to try to not just prepare for the next pandemic by like having more stockpiles of masks and ventilators and so on, but also to try to prevent it by reducing the things that are more likely to cause a pandemic. And factory farming of animals is one of those things.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's something that, people are definitely going to have more awareness of, having gone through all of this craziness.
Yeah, for sure.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much, Paul. Just to finish off, do you want to tell everybody how they can find out more about you, connect with you?
Sure, Katie. Yeah, so you can go to the Better Meat Co. website, which is bettermeat.co. Again, that's bettermeat.co. And you can get in touch with us there. You can also go to Twitter, and I'm at Paul H. Shapiro. That's Paul H. Shapiro. And send me a message there too. Love to hear from you.
Amazing. Cool. Well, thank you very much.
Cool. Thanks, Katie.
I really hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed recording it. All the links mentioned will be in the show notes, so do go and check them out. If you want to know more about how you can find your own purpose and create a life and career worth telling stories about, head over to our website uprise.academy and join one of our free workshops or subscribe to our newsletter. If you enjoyed the episode, it would be amazing if you could leave a review or even just share a screenshot on social media to help spread the word and support our message. Next week, we'll be talking to VC and entrepreneur Alex Dunstan, who is one of the most self-aware and reflective people I've ever spoken to on the subject of meaningful careers and entrepreneurship. And I can't wait to share it with you. If you don't want to miss it, make sure you hit subscribe, and I'll see you then.